right. Hello, everyone. It has been a minute, but I am happy to record another one of these and talk through a couple more things that I think are super important. I just want to start out with this graph or image or whatever you want to call it of the light triangle, just as a review and just like a general helpful visual aid for all of my visual people out there, which is probably all of y'all, if I'm being totally honest, photographers. So over on this side, on this left side, we have ISO. It has the numbers going up as the bar goes up, from less noise to more noise, from less fake light to more fake light. On over here on the right side, we have shutter speed. So 1/1000, less motion blur, to 1 over, all the way down to 1/8, which is more motion blur. And then at the bottom here, we have aperture. So we have on the left side a shallow depth of field, a low f-stop, all the way up to a deep depth of field, a high f-stop. And you can see this image, which is really helpful, I think, just in remembering like a lot of light being let in versus not a lot of light being let in. And that's this aperture image right here, where it's showing the lower f-stop actually has a wider opening, letting in more light. And then as you go up in your f-stop, it's less and less light being let in. And then inside the triangle, this is my favorite part. It's just showing, because last time in my last video I talked about how light is the most important. It is showing how your photo gets brighter, which is a very simple generalization of the idea, because more light is better, but it's also you want to be careful with brighter because you don't want to overexpose your photo, or like here with ISO, you don't want to just use a ton of ISO just because you can. You want to use minimal ISO in most situations, not every situation, but most situations. But it's showing you, hey, a lower shutter speed is making your photo brighter. It is also adding more motion blur. So, which is not always a bad thing. You can be used for some creative, cool shots, but in most situations, we don't want motion blur. We want a sharp photo. So it's just a helpful visual aid of this is what allows my photo to be brighter, but it also comes with more noise, even though it's brighter, or more motion blur, even though it's brighter. Or it's brighter, but this is a shallow depth of field. What if I have multiple people in my photo? Maybe that might be too shallow, so I can't just have my f-stop as low as I want it. So this is just a helpful image, and I hope it's helpful for y'all, and for y'all just to have and keep and use as a reference. Now I'm going to move on to composition. So this is basically framing of your photo, and this is a super, super important part of shooting. It's actually something that I think is a lot of times under-talked about and undervalued, and there's a lot of technical terms and technical things that go into learning composition. Like if you were doing a photography course, that is not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give just a more general, intuitive, life take on it of hey, if you're in this situation, this is gonna be something to consider when it comes to framing your photo. So I'm not trying to get into all the nitty-gritty technical history of photography and how composition came to be, and all that. I'm not really trying to get into all that. I'm trying to just give a good overview to get a grasp on composition for when you are in a situation where you're trying to figure out how to frame your photo. So you hear this a lot. Your photo should tell a story. Well, what does this really mean? What I think it means, what I think it comes down to, and as the most important thing to consider, is what is most important in your photo. What is the most important thing? So, in these pictures, and I know that if you were at my course that I did in person, this is review for you, just bear with me. In these pictures, the most important thing in these photos are the people. Here we got graduate, they're all graduates. We got Maggie over here on the left, we got Trevor in the middle, and we got Jake and Liza on the right here. And so that they are the most important part. They are the subject of the photo. They are very important, and they are obviously graduating. But the second most important, or just the layer to that, is where are they graduating from? Well, from these photos, it is pretty obvious if you are from anywhere in the South that they are graduating from Clemson University. And how do we know that? Yes, we got this little symbol right here, and yes, he's wearing orange, so, that's this is kind of a giveaway. His is kind of a giveaway. But we have Tillman in the back. Obviously Clemson. We have some of Death Valley being seen behind him, and this is actually technically a much closer shot. But even still, even with it being a fairly close portrait, you still have some of Death Valley in the back. You still have some of the orange sheets. You still have part of this sign that said "Welcome to Death Valley." And then here you have Sykes Hall. This one is probably the least obvious, but anyone who's been to Clemson knows very clearly this one is Clemson. Versus these photos. These are great photos. All these photos were delivered in the galleries with the grads. Like they were all delivered. They are great photos, and there's nothing wrong with these photos. But if you were a grad and you got your gallery back and all the photos looked like this, they were up close portraits, up close, would you be happy with your gallery? And if I were guessing, I would say probably not. Because if you are graduating from Clemson University and you got all your photos back and they all looked like this, even though these are great photos of some beautiful girls, lighting is great, photographers did a great job on these photos. And they are good. They're necessary to a gallery. You want these up-close shots. But if this was your whole gallery, well, you can't even see Tillman in the back, and you can't even see Sykes. You can't see the steps. You can't see their context. You can't see the world around them. And the world around them is a huge part of what's going on. It's a huge part of their story. They're not just graduates. They are graduating from Clemson University, and that is important to them. And so we want to show Clemson University. It doesn't mean that every one of our shots needs to be wide. It doesn't mean that we can't have these up-close portraits. It doesn't mean that, but it does mean that in order for a gallery to be complete, and some of those main shots that people are really looking for, if you pay attention, like on Instagram, to some of the pictures that people really want, it's this shot with Tillman all in the back. It's this shot with some of Death Valley in the back. It's this shot with Sykes. That is what people want. That is what people are looking for. And so here's another example. Here's some wedding exits. And this is maybe just, and again, like this could all be preference, and you are fully welcome to disagree with me. But here we have couples exiting their wedding ceremony. And to have some of this aisle right here, to have some of the bridal party, and here they had this beautiful tree that they loved they were getting married underneath this tree. Here, to have some of the bridal party in the back, to have it wide enough because they threw up flower petals, so to see the flower petals above them. She's looking up, so looking up, and you can see that she's looking up at the flower petals. Here they're exiting, and you can see the greenery, and you can see whose hand he's shaking, and you can see some of the aisle, and you can see the flower petals on the bottom. Versus these are these photos cropped in a lot tighter. Well, you can see her maid of honor and his best man. You can see some stuff. It's not like these are terrible. It's just like here she's looking up, but you can't tell what she's looking up at. Here you can't really see any of the people like on the aisles. You can't see any of the people on the aisles. You can't see the tree behind this couple right here. You're just missing the whole picture. You're missing the moment. And that's really what we're here to do, is we're here to capture a moment. And in most situations, now sometimes you have like a styled shoot and you're doing this really cool pose, and that's really cool and that's awesome. But most of the time as photographers, we are capturing moments that are happening, which means that if, the way we frame a photo, if we cut out a big chunk of the moment, then we just missed it. And so here, the couples are still here. This has full body of the couple. This has most of the couple, their faces, sharp and clean. Here, we got the couple, got their full body, sharp and clean. And that is the most important part, because the couple is the subject of the photo. But their environment, the world around them, is so important. So later when you're doing portraits with just the couple, well, yeah, get a wide shot, get an up-close shot, get real close on their faces, get all that. But when you're getting them exiting their wedding ceremony, well, you don't want to miss the world around them, because that's the moment. That's what's happening. The aisle, the sides, the people on the sides, the people behind them, their bridal party, that is the moment. That is what's most important, and that is what you were there to capture. Another point is aesthetically pleasing. So what does this really mean? A lot of us would say we kind of naturally have some of this, but really what just like a knack for aesthetically pleasing things. But really what it is it's visual awareness. So here's an example, another example from our wedding. And this is what I mean by visual awareness. So here, the subject is the four of us, Nick and myself and my parents. And we are, for the most part, pretty centered on the frame, and we're in focus. So, if that was the only criteria, we would say this is a good photo. But I think all of you would look at this photo and be like, not that it's a terrible photo, just like, it's not a great photo. And why is it not a great photo? And this is why. Well, here we have this structure behind us. It's an arbor. And so it's a square, rectangle, whatever you want to call it, structure. It's a geometric shape. And right now, you can see that the subject, us four, we are not centered in the geometric shape. Even though we're centered in the frame of the photo, which is another geometric shape. But there's this other geometric shape that has come into play because it's in the photo. If you took the arbor out, this photo would be great. Be perfectly fine because we're in focus, we're centered in the frame, we're good to go. But because the arbor is there, it is this new shape that has come into play. And instead of it being an addition to the photo, it's actually distracting, and it's taking away from the photo being a good photo because of the way this photo was framed. So here you can see this, like, here's a shape. It's a shape. We have these lines right here, the edges of the arbor. The edge of the arbor right here on the left side is right up against the picture frame, the frame of the photo. But then the arbor here on the right side is not anywhere close to the end of the photo. So that's kind of funky because the arbor should be like squared off with the picture frame. Because the frame of the photo, if you think about it, is a rectangle. And then the arbor is another straight shape, a square, rectangular shape. And so what you have here is those two shapes are actually clashing. And then us as the subject, we're centered in the frame of the photo, but we're not centered within the arbor. So what the photographer should have done here is she should have first looked at the moment, which was us standing underneath the arbor. She should have centered the four of us inside the arbor to make sure that there was these clean lines of us inside the arbor. And then she should have framed the photo around the arbor so that the sides of the arbor were at equal distance of the frame of the photo, or maybe she got the whole arbor in. Or she should have just moved us and not had the arbor in the photo in the first place. There's lots of things that could have happened here to make this photo better. And so really, at the end of the day, you have to remember that photography is about shapes and lines, and seeing those. It's like framing your photo is seeing shapes and lines, and figuring out how they work together to be visually appealing, to just have that awareness of, hey, these shapes could clash if I don't position them correctly. And so here, yes, the most important thing, the subject of the photo, the four of us, we are centered and in focus. But our background, we were not adjusted to fit our background well. So now the background, instead of it adding and being, oh, this beautiful arbor in the background, it's actually kind of distracting because it's like, what's going on with the arbor in the background? Like, why is it not centered? Why are they not centered on the arbor? There's just lots of things conflicting here. I know that was a lot, and I would love to, answer any questions and talk about it more. But those are my thoughts on this example of visual awareness. In contrast to this photo again, which I showed in another video. This is same spot. Obviously, there's a lot more people, but here you can see the arbor, even though we do have some of it cut off at the top, it was centered in the frame. And so Maddie on the left side here is second to last in the line, and Micah on the right side here is second to last in the line. And they are both in line with each side of the arbor. And there's really about the same amount of space between this log ending the arbor over here and the rest of the photo, the rest of the frame, and this log over here in between this log and the rest of the photo, the rest of the frame. There's the equal amount of space, and Nick and I are kind of in the center. I don't know if there's exactly the same amount of people. I mean, I guess technically Warner is another person, but but Nick and I are pretty much centered, and our family around us. So really Nick is centered, and because we got an extra kind of almost extra person with Warner right here, not a full person, but actually the positioning of all of us right here in this photo is exactly where we need to be, is to have Nick mostly centered, me and Nick sort of centered, but Nick mostly, because then we got 5 people on this side and 5 people on this side. So this photo was framed very well, and then you have the arbor centered behind us, and so that way the arbor being a big shape is not conflicting with the frame of the photo, because your frame of the photo is a shape, and it's a noticeable shape. It's not just like, oh, whatever's in there is in there. I'm like, no, it is a rectangle. Has clear lines, and anything within those clear lines needs to fit well within those lines. It doesn't need to be too crowded, doesn't need to be too wide, doesn't need to be like off-centered and awkwardly positioned. You just have to be aware. This is not to say that every picture needs everything centered all the time. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's not that everything being centered is the way to go in every photo, because there's, rule of thirds, and there's always like cool off-centered photos, and like that's all true. It's just in this example, it's very, I would say it's very obvious who needs to be centered, how the shapes need to be centered to align with one another, because we have, on these logs, we have straight lines here, and then the edge of the frame is a straight line. And so if those are, obstructing one another, then it just looks awkward instead of looking like nice and clean and visually appealing. So that's not to say that every single object in every single photo needs to be centered. But I would say in these examples, it is more intuitive for the subject to be centered, and for any objects behind them to also be helping frame that photo instead of conflicting with the picture frame. And then another thing to consider is depth. So here we have 2 examples of 2 different photos in the same place, but one is, at least in my opinion, but I would say objectively better than the other, and that is this one of Maggie versus this one of Sarah. They're both great photos. They're in focus. Their faces are sharp. But here with Sarah's photo on the right, we have her pretty close to the bell. This is at Clemson, pretty close to the bell behind her. And so there's not a lot of space between her and the bell. And so instead of us really being able to see the bell behind her and it being this interesting background, it kind of just feels like it's in the way. Like the bell's right here by her head, and, like this, like not gravel, granite or whatever it's called. It's kind of just like right behind her. It's not that it's like straight up wrong. It's just because it's like a good photo of Sarah, and she could put it as her profile picture, and probably wouldn't ever think twice about it. But to be honest, like as a photo, like the full frame, the background just kind of seems like it's in the way, and you kind of wish like, hey, this is a great photo of Sarah. She looks so pretty in this picture. I wish it was just her. I wish the bell wasn't behind her, because it's kind of in the way. Versus this photo of Maggie, ignore the little blue person back there. Versus this photo of Maggie, it's a great photo of Maggie. She looks beautiful. And then the bell is behind her, but there's a lot of distance between her and the bell. And so the bell is intentionally off-centered in this photo. And it doesn't look like a mistake. It just looks like she has this interesting background behind her. And you can tell, oh, wow, that's Clemson, and that's the bell, and you can kind of see the library back there. You get to see the trees and the beautiful grass. And instead of her being like straight on with the bell and the bell being cut off awkwardly straight on, instead it's this intentional angle that allows for some of the bell to be cut off. But that's because we're obviously not trying to get the whole bell in the picture, because this is just an interesting background for Maggie. And so really the reason why this one, I think, just overall looks more visually appealing is because there is this distance between her and the bell, and it gives depth, and it makes the background, you're able to actually see more of it, which makes it more interesting. But it's actually less distracting than the one that is super close up, where you can actually see less of it. And so it's kind of, honestly, I have a hard time explaining better than that. And so if I've totally confused you, I apologize, and I would love to talk about it more. Again, this is not to say that Sarah's photo is like straight up incorrect. it's just not as interesting a photo, and it actually feels like the background is distracting from her, versus Maggie's, where it feels like, oh, like the background is interesting and it's there and I can see what it is, but it doesn't have to take away from Maggie, and it doesn't distract from Maggie, who looks adorable in this photo. I'd love to, again, talk about that more, because I know it's kind of a hard concept to explain. At least I find it hard to explain. Maybe you have a better way of explaining it, and and you can teach me, and I would love that. It'd be great. Here's another example. So here we have some more depth between Maggie and the bell, and the photographer was actually further back, and so they were able to focus on Maggie because she is the subject, but they were able to get the whole bell. And this is actually another example of that geometric shapes like interfering with one another, just like I was talking about with the wedding photo. Here with the bell, we have all these straight lines, and so we actually want them to complement the lines around, like as the frame of the photo. We don't want them to collide with each other and kind of interfere with each other. We'd actually, this space to have the whole bell be seen is actually quite nice. It's quite nice to have the bell just fit nicely in the frame without it being super crowded feeling. It just kind of feels like a really nice background to then focus on Maggie, but it's like very much a Clemson photo. It's very much at Clemson. It's very obvious it's at Clemson. Versus this one of Sarah, there's not a lot of distance between her and the bell, so it's kind of, instead of here, in Maggie's picture, the bell is actually more out of focus a little bit. Oops, sorry. Here in Sarah's picture, the bell is very much in focus because they're basically in the same depth of field. So once again, it's a little bit intrusive to her and taking the focus away from her. I would say it's also less appealing with the frame of the photo because we're pulled in and inside the bell instead of getting to see the whole bell, and it just feels a little crowded to me. It feels like the bell is kind of crowding the frame, and if it's not perfectly straight, then you're going to kind of have these straight lines that are then interfering with the straight lines of the frame of the photo, and so it just feels hard to make this photo look great. And then you're like, oh, I gotta have it's centered with the same amount of bricks. It's just like, versus this one, you're just able to have a general same amount of space on either side. You're able to straighten the photo, and the bell can just be a nice background instead of the bell feeling like the subject in this photo, when Sarah's supposed to be the subject. So yeah, I would love to talk about this more and give more examples and be able to hopefully even explain this better the more we work through it, and just answer any questions you might have about this idea of depth. Last point about composition framing is focus. Is where is the focus of your photo? So here's two examples taken right after each other. Obviously one is better than the other for a couple reasons. The first reason being, like, their faces, even if this one is sweet, this one is definitely a little bit more expressive and fun. But aside from that, let's just pretend that's not part of it. This is another example of, pulling focus and centering something to pull focus. It doesn't mean that you always have to have something centered. It's not that there's anything wrong with them being off-centered in this top photo. But the reality is it kind of pulls focus to the flowers and like his shoulder, and it's like you have to take an extra second to look over at them. And the veil is kind of coming down too far, so it's just leaving this empty space right here. And the empty space, the greenery is nice, but it's really just trees and grass. It's nothing's really there that's that important on this side part. So then we have all the important stuff heavily over here, and that's okay for some pictures. It's okay to have some pictures where you have someone off-centered and you have a whole other kind of like wide, empty side of the frame, and it's this big, beautiful, wide shot. Like, I love stuff like that. So I'm not hating on that or saying you have to have your subject always perfectly centered, but because of a couple different things. Because the flowers are actually adding interest to the photo and actually pulling focus can be used to pull focus back to them, or they can be used to pull focus to themselves. But here we're not trying to pull focus to the flowers. We're actually trying to pull focus to the couple. And then the veil is being used, but we're not trying to pull focus to the greenery back here. We're trying to pull focus to the couple. So down here, the flowers are now filling this space and they're pulling focus back to the couple. They're making it look interesting, but it's actually, it's not trying to take up the center of the photo. It's not trying to steal the show. And then the veil is nicely coming down and looping down here. We're holding it up. And so that it actually like fills this space, that in a unique way, it actually pulls focus back to the center of the photo, because it like reframes them again following the frame of the photo. So if this was like a vertical picture, you might frame it a little differently, but because it's horizontal, we're guiding the veil the same route that the horizontal framing of the photo is. So it's coming down and coming over here and filling this lower space to then point back to the couple. This flower is filling this space over here to then point back to the couple. The veil coming up right here, pointing back to the couple. And then you have the nice trees behind them. And then the couple being centered right here is super important, because it's about them, and it's about their face in this moment, looking at each other, being sweet, being close, being so excited that they just got married. And then you have nice little details just added in. You can see her ring, you can see her bracelet, you can see her earrings. None of those are the focus. And this is not to say that you shouldn't have pictures that, where the details are the focus. Have pictures where the flowers are the focus, have pictures where the earrings and the bracelet, they're the focus. But in this photo specifically, the couple and their faces and being close together is the focus. And so how do we use not just our frame of our photo, but how do we use flowers and the veil and the frame of our photo to pull focus to what is most important in this photo?